My name is Rebecca Thornton. I am 67 years old. Today, in a courtroom filled with strangers, my entire life was erased, reduced to just 2 words. Just a housewife. Those words came from my stepson, Tyler Thornton, delivered with a laugh that echoed far louder than it should have. People turned to look at me, some with curiosity, some with quiet judgment, a few with pity. 6 months ago, my husband Charles died. We had been married for 20 years. When he passed, he left me everything: his company, his properties, his accounts, the life we built together piece by piece. Tyler did not accept that. He sued me. He claimed I manipulated his father, that I isolated him, that I took advantage of an aging man and rewrote his will for my own benefit. He hired the most expensive lawyer in the city to prove it. I stood alone at the defense table. No attorney beside me, no legal team. Just a woman in a simple navy dress, holding a small purse with both hands to keep them from shaking. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and old arguments, the kind of place where truth is supposed to matter, but appearances often matter more. Across from me sat Tyler, 35 years old, in a perfect suit, with a relaxed posture and the confidence of someone who believed this was already over. Next to him was his lawyer, Blake Harrington. People whispered his name like a warning: ruthless, brilliant, expensive. When the judge entered, the room stood. When Blake began his opening statement, the room leaned in. He spoke smoothly, calmly, as if explaining something obvious. "Your Honor," he said, "this is a clear case of undue influence. A woman with no career, no education of consequence, and no independent income inserting herself into the life of a wealthy widower." Then Tyler smiled and said it again. "She is just a housewife." Something shifted inside me at that moment, because the lawyer standing across from me suddenly stopped talking. His face went pale. His briefcase slipped from his hand and hit the floor. And as he looked at me, truly looked at me, his voice dropped to a whisper. "It is really you. I cannot believe it." Tyler had no idea who I truly was. Stay with me until the end and tell me in the comments which city you are watching from. I want to know how far this story reaches. The morning it all began started like every other morning since Charles died. Quiet, heavy, still. I made coffee in the ceramic mug he gave me for our 15th anniversary, white with a thin blue line around the rim. I sat at the kitchen table where we had shared 20 years of ordinary mornings, and tried to pretend the silence did not press against my chest. The house felt too large now, too empty. Every room carried an echo of him. His shoes by the door, his glasses on the side table, the chair where he used to sit and read the paper every evening. I was still sitting there when the doorbell rang. A young man stood on the porch wearing a cheap suit and a practiced expression, polite, detached. He handed me an envelope without meeting my eyes. "Mrs. Thornton, legal documents. Please sign here." My hands trembled as I opened the papers. Tyler was contesting the will. The words were cold and clinical. Undue influence, manipulation, exploitation of a vulnerable elderly man. According to the documents, I had isolated Charles from his son and convinced him to leave me everything. I sank into Charles's old leather chair, the one where he used to nap on Sunday afternoons. 20 years of marriage reduced to accusations printed in black ink. I was not angry yet. I was stunned. I thought of the nights I slept in a chair beside his hospital bed, the medications I learned to manage, the meals I prepared when he was too weak to stand, the times I begged Tyler to visit and heard excuse after excuse. But grief does not argue back. Grief just sits with you and lets the world speak for you. By the time I finished reading, my hands had stopped shaking. Not because I felt strong, but because something inside me had gone very still. If Tyler wanted a fight, he would have it. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I would not let the last chapter of my life be written as a lie. Tyler Thornton had been 12 years old when I married his father. Old enough to remember his mother clearly. Old enough to resent the woman who stepped into a space that could never truly be filled. From the beginning, I tried to be careful with him. I did not force affection. I did not demand respect. I cooked the meals he liked. I showed up to school events, even when he pretended not to see me in the audience. I stayed quiet when he spoke to me with indifference and reminded myself that grief does strange things to children. As he grew older, the distance did not close. It hardened. Tyler came around when he needed something, money for rent, help covering a credit card, a loan he promised to repay once things got better. Charles always said yes. He always believed this time would be different. I learned not to argue. I told myself that being a good wife sometimes meant being silent, that loving someone meant accepting the parts of their family that hurt. But when Charles got sick, the silence became unbearable. I called Tyler again and again. I left messages. I sent texts. I explained how tired his father was, how much it would mean to him to see his son. Tyler said he was busy. He said he would come later. Later never came. When Charles died, Tyler arrived for the funeral, looking composed and distant. He hugged me stiffly and thanked me for taking care of his father. I thought foolishly that maybe grief had finally brought us closer. The lawsuit proved how wrong I was. It was not just the accusation that hurt. It was the ease with which he erased 20 years of effort, the way he spoke about me as if I had never been part of his father's life at all. In that moment I realized something painful. This was not just about money. This was about a man who had never forgiven me for staying when he chose to leave. Walking into the courthouse that first day felt like stepping into someone else's story. The marble floors were cold beneath my shoes. Every sound echoed, the distant slam of heavy doors opening and closing. It was intimidating by design, a place meant to remind you how small you are in the face of the law. Tyler was already there. He sat at the plaintiff's table with an easy confidence, leaning back in his chair as if this were a business meeting he expected to win. His suit fit perfectly. His hair was carefully styled. He looked like a man who had rehearsed this moment. Beside him sat Blake Harrington. I recognized him immediately, not from personal experience but from reputation. The kind of attorney people hire when they want to crush someone quietly and legally. Expensive, precise, unemotional. The type who never loses because he never underestimates his opponent. Except he had underestimated me. I took my place alone at the defense table. No briefcase, no assistant, just my purse resting in my lap like an anchor. When Judge Caroline Mercer entered, the room stood in unison. She carried herself with calm authority, her gaze moving slowly across the courtroom as if she were taking inventory of every soul present. "Mrs. Thornton," she asked, looking directly at me, "do you have legal representation today?" I stood. "No, Your Honor. I am representing myself." A flicker of concern crossed her face. She glanced toward Tyler's side of the room, then back to me. "Mrs. Thornton, this is a serious matter involving substantial assets. I strongly advise you to consider obtaining counsel." I nodded. "I understand, Your Honor." What I did not say was that hiring a lawyer felt like admitting guilt, that spending Charles's money to defend myself against his own son felt wrong, that somewhere deep inside I believed the truth should be enough. The judge gave a small nod and turned her attention to the other table. "Mr. Harrington, you may begin." And just like that, the story of my life was placed in someone else's hands. Blake Harrington stood slowly, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate care. "Your Honor," he began, "we are here today because a grieving son has been forced to confront a painful truth, that his father's final wishes were shaped not by love, but by manipulation." His voice was calm, measured, the kind of voice people trusted. He painted a picture of me as a woman who appeared at the perfect moment. A lonely widower, a quiet home, an opportunity disguised as companionship. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, "has no professional background to speak of, no meaningful career, no independent income. She depended entirely on my client's father for financial stability." I felt the room shift. He continued, listing facts stripped of context, that I did not work outside the home, that I managed household affairs, that I accompanied Charles to appointments, that I handled his medications during his illness. Care, he implied, was control. Then Tyler leaned forward. "Your Honor," he said, glancing back at me with a smirk. She could barely manage her own finances. She probably doesn't even understand half of what my father owned. A few people in the gallery nodded. That hurt more than I expected because I had spent years pretending that being underestimated did not matter, that being seen as simple was harmless. But hearing my life reduced to incompetence in a public room cut deeper than grief ever had. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly. I did not argue law. I spoke truth. I loved my husband, I said. I took care of him because I wanted to, not because I expected anything in return. Blake smiled faintly, as if indulging a child. Love is not on trial here, Mrs. Thornton. Influence is. Judge Mercer raised her hand. I have heard enough for today, she said. We will adjourn and reconvene tomorrow morning. As the room emptied, Tyler laughed quietly. Blake shook his hand and I sat there alone, realizing that kindness had just been mistaken for weakness. That night the house felt different. Not quieter, not sadder, but heavier. I sat alone in Charles's study, surrounded by shelves he rarely touched but never removed. Old books, framed photographs, a life carefully preserved. The kind of room that holds secrets even when no one is speaking. I poured a small glass of wine and let myself breathe. That was when I noticed the jewelry box on the desk. I had opened it 1,000 times before, earrings, rings, small keepsakes from vacations long past. But that night my fingers brushed against something hard beneath the velvet lining. A key. Small, unlabeled, forgotten. Charles had given it to me years ago. For emergencies, he had said. When you need it. I had never asked what it opened. My heart pounded as I crossed the room and knelt beside his desk. The bottom drawer had always been locked. I had respected that. Marriage does not require possession. The key slid in easily. The drawer opened with a soft click. Inside was a manila folder, neatly labeled in Charles's careful handwriting. Rebecca, personal. My hands trembled as I opened it. Documents stared back at me. Old but pristine, a framed truth I had packed away long ago. A law degree. Honors noted in crisp print. Certificates of appointment. A photograph of a younger woman standing straight, hand raised, eyes steady. I recognized her immediately. She was me. I had not imagined that life. I had lived it. At the bottom of the folder was a folded piece of paper, a handwritten note from Charles. Rebecca, I know you think you became smaller when you chose love. You did not. You chose something braver. If anyone ever forgets who you are, this will remind them, including you. The tears came then, quiet, uncontrolled. For 20 years I had been a wife, a caregiver, a steady presence. But I had not been erased. I had only been waiting. And tomorrow I would stop waiting. The next morning I wore the same navy dress. Not because I wanted to appear unchanged, but because I wanted them to underestimate me again. The difference was not in the fabric. It was in my posture, my pace, the way my eyes moved through the room as if I belonged there. Because I did. Tyler and Blake were already seated when I arrived. Blake was reviewing documents with the confidence of a man who believed yesterday had gone well. Tyler looked relaxed, almost amused, like this was a formality before victory. Judge Mercer entered promptly and took her seat. Mr. Harrington, she said, you may call your next witness. Blake stood and called Megan Pierce, my neighbor. Megan looked nervous as she took the stand. She avoided my eyes as she spoke about the afternoon she found me crying on my front steps, about how I said I was afraid of what would happen after Charles died. Blake let her words hang in the air, then her. Judge Mercer turned to me. Mrs. Thornton, do you wish to cross-examine? I stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. I walked to the witness stand and stopped at a comfortable distance. Megan, I said gently, when you found me crying that day, why was I upset? Because Charles had just been told the treatment was not working, she answered. And what did I say I was afraid of? She hesitated, then sighed. You said you were afraid of being alone. I nodded. Thank you. Blake's smile tightened. He called the banker next. Under my questions, the banker admitted Charles reorganized his finances to make things easier for me after his death. Not to hide assets, not to control them, but to prepare. When I returned to my seat, Judge Mercer studied me closely. "Mrs. Thornton," she said, "may I ask you something for the record?" "Of course, Your Honor." "What is your full legal name?" The room went quiet. I took a breath. "Rebecca and Thornton." And just like that, the balance of the room began to shift. Judge Mercer's pen paused in midair. "Rebecca and Thornton," she repeated slowly. Her eyes lifted to mine, searching, measuring. Then something changed in her expression, recognition, not certainty yet, but possibility. "Mrs. Thornton," she said carefully, "before your marriage, did you practice law?" "I did, Your Honor." Blake Harrington shifted in his seat. Judge Mercer leaned back slightly. "In what capacity?" I kept my voice steady. "I served on the Superior Court bench for 15 years. I retired 2 decades ago." The silence that followed was absolute. Blake's face drained of color so quickly it was almost frightening. He stood up without realizing he was doing it. His briefcase slipped from the table and hit the floor, papers scattering at his feet. He did not look down. He was staring at me. "No," he whispered, then louder, his voice tight with disbelief. "It is really you." He took a step forward, stopped himself, and then did something no one expected. He bowed his head. "Judge Thornton," he said quietly, "I cannot believe I did not recognize you." Tyler turned toward me. His mouth open, confusion and panic fighting for control of his face. Judge Mercer's voice was firm. "Mr. Harrington, do you know the defendant?" "Yes, Your Honor. I appeared before her early in my career." Judge Thornton was widely respected. "That is one way to put it," Judge Mercer said drily. She turned to Blake. "Did you conduct a full background review of the opposing party?" Blake swallowed. "We reviewed public records under her married name, Your Honor." Judge Mercer's eyes hardened. "So you failed to investigate the woman you publicly described as uneducated and incapable." Blake said nothing. I remained seated. I did not smile. I did not speak. Because this was not about revenge. This was about truth finally standing where it belonged. Judge Mercer called a short recess. When the courtroom reconvened, the air felt different, quieter, heavier. The confidence that had filled Tyler's side of the room was gone, replaced by something brittle and uncertain. "Your Honor," I said, standing once more, "I would like to present additional evidence." Judge Mercer nodded. "You may proceed, Mrs. Thornton." I walked to the front of the courtroom holding a slim tablet. "My husband anticipated this challenge," I continued. "He knew that his will might be questioned, and he wanted his own voice to be heard if that happened." I pressed play. Charles appeared on the screen, thinner than I remembered him, but clear-eyed and steady. "My name is Charles Thornton," he said. "I am of sound mind as I record this statement. I am making this because I believe my son may one day claim that my wife manipulated me." Tyler's shoulders slumped. "Rebecca did not manipulate me," Charles continued. "She did not isolate me. She did not influence my decisions. Every choice I made was my own, based on years of observation and experience." He paused. "I love my son, but love does not erase responsibility. Over the past 15 years, I have given Tyler financial support more times than I can count. He has not repaid it. He has not changed his behavior. Rebecca, however, stood beside me through illness, uncertainty, and decline without complaint. She gave up a life most people only dream of because she believed in us." The video ended. No one spoke. I then presented financial records, documented loans, dates, amounts, missed repayments, a pattern that spoke louder than any accusation. "This case," I said, "was never about exploitation. It was about entitlement, about mistaking grief for justification." I turned slightly toward Tyler. "I loved your father. I never asked him to choose between us. He chose honesty, and he chose responsibility." Judge Mercer reviewed the evidence carefully before speaking. "This court finds no evidence of undue influence," she said. "The will of Charles Thornton is valid and enforceable in full." She looked directly at Tyler. "Furthermore, The court finds that the plaintiff acted with reckless disregard for the defendant's reputation. This matter is dismissed with prejudice. Tyler stared at the table in front of him, defeated. 6 months later, my life looks different. I did not return to the bench, but I did open a small practice, quiet, focused, purposeful. I represent women who are told they are too old, too emotional, too dependent to understand their own lives. Women who are called just something. One afternoon, a message appeared on my phone. Rebecca, it was Tyler. I am trying to do better. I understand now that I was wrong. We met for coffee. We spoke honestly. Not forgiveness, not yet, but accountability. And that was enough to begin. Standing in my office now, looking out at the city, I understand something I once forgot. Your worth is not measured by the role you play for others. It is measured by the truth you carry and the courage to stand in it when challenged. If my story resonated with you like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and tell me in the comments which city you are watching from. Because stories like this travel farther than we ever expect.